So once again, good evening. This is Paul Fredette, and with me is my wife Karen, and together we minister to hermits and to religious solitaries throughout the world through Raven's Bread Ministries, right here from our home in Western North Carolina. And as we were saying to all the viewers who have joined in to share with us this evening, as well as some of you who might be joining in for the first time, we have been, over the past few presentations, experiencing a few technical difficulties.
Just a few.
So we're sorry for the delay, and hopefully this week we won't have the audio difficulties. We'll have different ones than we had in the past 2 weeks. Over the course of these several presentations, if you're just joining us for the first time, we've been discussing some of the elementary features of eremitic life, especially in its resurgence over the last 40-50 years. And last week, we focused on perhaps what is the hallmark of eremitic life, and that is stability. The fact that actually hermits don't do much of anything, they're more focused on simply being there. And actually that's harder than it sounds or looks.
Yes.
Developing the kind of awareness, the kind of mindfulness, the being in one place, and fostering the virtues that we discussed last week of compassion and hospitality are the great challenges of the eremitic life. Wanted to share with you one of the passages last week that we weren't able to get to, and it's rather telling. When Thomas Merton, the famous Cistercian, was commenting on this lack of really doing anything, he put it this way. He said, hermits never seem to get anywhere. He says their stories are all inconclusive. Now, he was talking to his own novices about Cistercian hermits of the past. He says they seem to have died before finding out what it was they were supposed to do. It made him, he said, understand the incompletedness of, say, an example like Blessed Conrad, who had been a Cistercian hermit who had been given permission to live in Palestine. And when he heard that Bernard was dying, he started home for Clairvaux. And he got as far as Italy, and there he heard that Bernard had died. So he settled in a wayside chapel there in Bari, in Italy, and there he died. Thomas Merton goes on to say, what an untidily unplanned life. No order, no sense, no system, no climax. Like a book without punctuation that suddenly ends in the middle of a sentence. Yet Merton also adds, these are the books that I really like. Of all people, solitaries know least where they are going. And yet they are more sure, for there is one thing that they cannot doubt. They travel where God is leading them. And that's precisely why they don't know the way. It's also why, in the sight of most people, their way is something of a scandal. Actually, Merton's own life seems to have died in the middle of a sentence. He was planning to give another talk on the day he died, accidentally. The subject of his talk was to discuss with what all contemplatives or mystics of the world had in common. Instead, by his death, he demonstrated their most common of all human traits, their mortality. He shared the water of his own hard-won wisdom, not in the little pitcher of an hour-long conference, but rather in the flood of his life, poured out for the many. Even if the younger hermits, or those initially looking to live hermit life, know in their minds that it's not so much about doing things or achieving things, getting anywhere, they still tend to want to know what they ought to do. Anthony de Mello, another Jesuit who died in midlife, rather accidentally, loved to tell the story of the young disciple that comes to his learned spiritual master and says, "Is there anything I can do to make myself enlightened?" To which the master replies, "As little as you can do to make the sun rise in the morning." To which the disciple rejoins, "Well then, of what use are all those spiritual exercises that you prescribe?" The wise master responds, "To make sure that you are not asleep when the sun does begin to rise." In the early experience of hermits, especially in the Christian world, the first thing that men and women aspiring to that life did as they went out into the desert was to seek out an experienced guide, an elder. Those Amas and Abbas, the mothers and fathers of the desert, offered this service as a part of their ministry of hospitality, which we discussed last week. And that kind of faith, that seeking out of the elders, persists today. People still make pilgrimages into the forests of the Russian hinterland to find a holy starets, or in the Native American tradition, young people transitioning to adulthood seek out a renowned elder or grandmother. And also, people in midlife facing an unexpected call to eremitic vocation also search out an understanding and experienced guide. However, much more easily said than done.
Yes.
Especially in our survey that we talked about a few weeks ago, we found so many of the people in solitary life that we surveyed had discussed the anguish that they felt in their fruitless search, often totally fruitless, for a competent spiritual guide. And even when the church tried to be helpful and tried to provide guidance to these people, it's often wound up being spiritual guidance by a committee of professionals, whether that was finance, or whether that was housing, or whether that was insurance, or whether that was in the matter of a habit. Or it reminded us of that old fable about the 5 blind men standing around an elephant trying to describe what it looks like. The difficulties arose because all of these individuals were speaking out of their professional life, but none of them actually had any experience of eremitic life. So, although they were proficient in their own fields, they only had a very hazy idea of what a hermit truly is. There they were asking hermits to prove their financial security, including having things like a burial trust or costly forms of insurance, when the hermit was aspiring to live a vow of poverty with the implicit insecurities that implied. Or even when the hermit was seeking to be hidden from the eyes of the world, they were being told they had to wear a habit, which would ensure that they would be noticed immediately wherever they went. As we read through the survey those cries of help, we suspect that the root of the problem may be that the image of the hermit is what is governing religious imaginations by these professionals, rather than what is the essential life of the hermit, which requires something in the way of guidance that really is a serious process of discernment. Isn't it, Karen?
Yeah. And we'd like to say that one of the most important times in your life is when you are discerning the call to hermit life. Now, we can always sit down and play the game of what would be the most ideal guide for someone discerning a call to eremitical life. And that ideally would be a hermit who, him or herself, has gone through the process and is gifted in helping others find their way and make a proper decision whether they are truly called to hermit life. However, finding a hermit in the first place is always difficult because there is no such thing as a bureau of registered hermits. And even among the hermits, not all of them are gifted spiritual guides.
It's true.
So we have people having sometimes to fall back only on the mysterious workings of the Spirit. But if you are not fortunate enough to find a hermit to guide you, your next best bet is to find someone gifted in leading you through what is called the exercises of St. Ignatius, which were written to be a form of very serious and very good discernment. Talking about my own experience, no, there were no hermits available that I could make a retreat with, but I did have a good, gifted Jesuit director, and he gave me the exercise, put me through the exercises of St. Ignatius for 8 days, during which time we examined all the questions that are necessary for making a valid discernment of any kind. What are your motives? Weighing the positive against the negative. How can you tell if you are being self-deceived? Something I had really feared from the beginning. And why are you doing this? Are you running away? Are you seeking perhaps an unrealistic vision of yourself in a hermitage where you are walking in floating and with spiritual exaltation 5 inches above the muddy floor? As I went through this discernment process, I prayed deeply, and at the end, my director had only one word for me: you have made a valid discernment. In other words, you have gone through every step you can to assure that what you are choosing is God's will. But the next step, the most important one, is the test of time. And he told me that I needed to find a hermitage where I could spend my time in almost complete solitude for 3 months, and then come back, and we would consider the validity of my call to hermit life. And I was filled with joy for about 5 minutes until I realized that one test was to find that hermitage.
That's the first test.
That turns out to be the first test. And I really couldn't go to a place. I had no money. I couldn't afford to spend 3 months at a retreat house. But in God's own good time, I met up with a priest who was a pastor of 2 small parishes in West Virginia. And he lived at one parish, but there was an small empty house at the other parish, where he was willing to allow me to live for 3 months. It so happened that those 3 months were the dreariest 3 months of the year, January through March. I sort of went from Christmas to Easter in this hermitage, and I struggled. I won't tell you that I didn't. But at the end of that period, I also felt very satisfied and had a deep contentment within myself. This anecdotal account of one person's discernment process may help point out how important spiritual guidance is when you are trying to untangle the Gordian knot of all your conflicting emotions, needs, and desires that are tumbling around in your heart. But if one cannot find a hermit or anyone who can really guide you, you must simply throw yourself in trust in God, and as the saying goes, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Some of our readers from Ravensbrad said that their teacher appeared in the form of their dog, who taught them a great deal about living with great love, living in the present moment. Other people just came across the exact right book, or they heard a sentence which answered their questions, and it might have been that of a child who simply stated the obvious, and they knew that by following it, they would be on the right path. According to the letters which Ravensbrad receives, many hermits had to learn about hermit life through the school of hard knocks, profiting by their mistakes and learning to live more honestly and listening more intently to that still small voice within. Self-discipline and integrity of heart can assist us to acknowledge that, warts and all, we are being called to hermit life. It is important then to know that we can be safe by following our inner guide, who will be there for us, our God who will never leave us without His Holy Spirit.
That self-discipline and integrity of heart that Karen just mentioned are essential. But early on, as well as throughout our lives, it can be hard to maintain that self-discipline and integrity of heart completely alone. Apart from the initial discernment process, the value of having a spiritual guide is for accountability. Even the desert dwellers of many, many years' experience knew the value of opening their souls to another. Because of our innate tendencies to gloss over our own weaknesses and to ignore how our ideals might be on a slippery slope to outright sloth, all of us can benefit by having someone to whom we must make an honest accounting at established intervals. There's a story written in the Native American tradition that highlights the value of accountability. I'd like to share just a little portion of it with you this evening. It goes like this. When you need to look into darkness, the owl will come. When you need to peer deep into your own fear and hesitation, this great bird of the night will somehow find its way into your life. The owl is about exploring the shadow of your life, the part you might not want to see, the dark side of our personal moon, you might say. The owl is about emotional honesty, self-knowledge, and especially self-examination. During the early years of evaluating our experience as a hermit, weighing what works, what doesn't work, giving a spiritual account of ourselves should be as frequent as monthly, once a month. After we're more firmly established in our life and we're bumping along at a reasonable rate, then perhaps these meetings can become less frequent. What was desirable at the very beginning might at a later stage actually prove to be a distraction, because we have to remember that the goal of eremitic life is to become more and more hidden, unseen not only by others, but even by our own self. As we've said earlier, the mature hermit is one who no longer even thinks of him or herself as a hermit. Sometimes giving a spiritual account of oneself too frequently can result in focusing our thoughts on ourselves too much, when our goal is actually to focus ever more continually on the one who is examining us at every turn. Some minor spiritual ills actually heal better when they're ignored, rather than being picked over too much. One of the tests might be that if we become depressed at the thought of preparing for another spiritual mentoring session, it might be a sign that we no longer need such close supervision. And then, if there's mutual agreement between the one providing the guidance and the one seeking the guidance, then the frequency of the meetings can be stepped down. And we can more safely step out into the unknown to truly become alone with the alone.
We learn to be able to endure what we call the bumps in the night. Those are those incidents that initially surprise us, but in the long run are of no particular danger to us. There is one of those bumps, though, that we really do need to pay attention to, and that is acedia, a word that is not frequently bandied around in these days. Not so when the hermits were filling the Egyptian deserts. Then, Acedia was known as the noonday devil. It was the listlessness that fills the hermit with an unholy sadness, robbing him of the joy of his or her vocation. Thomas Aquinas, many centuries later, described how this kind of depression results from a failure to make the necessary effort to embrace totally one's commitment to the divine good. A person becomes susceptible to acedia when he or she does not wholeheartedly give their yes to their eremitical call. Kenneth Russell, in an article that was published in Review for Religion several years ago, explained it very well. He keenly summed it up, saying that not given yes seems to threaten individuals with a negation of all their potentiality and to promise a lifetime of misery. They choose, therefore, to swim no further. What they really opt for is some measure of control over their own comfort in front of the incalculable risks of relatedness to God alone. Not wanting to push further upstream and not wanting to lose face by turning back altogether, the victims of acedia tread water, as it were, and either console their anxieties by sleeping more or attempt to dissipate them by one distraction after another.
True.
Acedia is the failure to give oneself wholeheartedly to the demands of solitude, and ends up being a rather dismal hanging on to control over one's life while keeping the back door open for a hidden escape. As such, it is a virus that is virulent enough to destroy your hermit life altogether. Is there a cure? Acedia is a deceptive condition, and when it is not recognized for what it is, we may end up applying precisely the wrong remedy. Accurate diagnosis is crucial at this point, and this is where good guidance and a good director comes in. If our condition is the result of too intense an application to prayer, reading, and study, we may need relaxation and a better balance to our daily life. And this makes sense only if the better balance still keeps us firmly in our solitude. We need to keep on keeping on, but we need some healthy variety. And that can be simple enjoyments that we can look forward to and which gives us pleasure each day. If we are inclined and gifted so, we can do craft work, which gives us satisfaction. There are puzzles and solitary games that just relax our mind and our body a bit. At this time, having a TV within the Hermitage could be the equivalent of the demon in the corner that the desert Amas and Abbas occasionally mentions. As an aside about TV and other electronic media in the Hermitage, I would like to point out that if we are living the hermit life, we are trying to be as open as we can to the world around us and within us. And we lose the unconscious defenses that people put up when they watch too much electronic media. I know from my own experience that I cannot watch TV frequently, nor a movie, without having it invade me, as it were, and haunt me for days. When I mentioned this to a friend, he said, well, perhaps you should watch more of it so that you have that defense in place. And I thought, well, to what purpose? I mean, I had worked long and hard to be very sensitive to the God within and the God around me. Did I want to lose that just so I could watch TV? No, I don't think that was the answer. As was said earlier, a hermit must learn the difference between healthy enjoyments and just distractions that destroy the heart of the contemplative life.
Mm-hmm. A couple of other things that hermits need to be wary of, besides putting up those same defenses that will defeat the very purpose of opening themselves to the still small voice, are those people who are quick to advise a change of scenery. Too often today, whether it's a religious vocation or some other vocation, people are very quick to suggest that, well, perhaps a sabbatical, or perhaps an extended vacation or a period of psychological treatment is what the doctor ordered. Well, maybe, but then maybe not. If the problem is acedia, what's being called for is simply a deeper silence and more solitude and adherence to contemplative practice. Now, we're not talking here about problems like alcohol abuse or some other chemical dependency that can even make their way, creep into a hermitage, and may be an indication that the person is not suited to a life of solitude. But whatever, these need radical treatment. But on the whole, just a change of scenery is not really what's being called for. And the flip side of that is that too many frequent absences from the hermitage have also proven to deteriorate the depth of one's peace. We've had many hermits say that they would leave their hermitage for some extended period of time, and after returning and being glad, the initial joy of returning to the hermitage, they would find it very difficult to once again recover that same sense of depth and peace. It would take them a long time. One hermit described it as, she said, it's like when I come back, I have to get in an elevator, a long, slow elevator going down. And of course, the answer to this is time and patience. But we've heard many experience guides suggest that newer hermits, younger in the life, learn how to bundle their errands so that they can get a number of things, necessary things, done all at once, and so can leave the hermitage less frequently, limiting themselves to maybe once or twice a week even.
Balancing is what we have been talking about, isn't it, Paul?
Right.
And we have this invaluable story from the wisdom of the Desert Fathers. It seems that there was a hunter in the desert, and he saw Abba Anthony, the true father of all hermits, enjoying himself with the other hermits sitting around them. And he was shocked, wanting to show this hunter that it was necessary sometimes to meet the needs of our human condition. Abba Anthony said to him, "Put an arrow in your bow and shoot it." So he did. The old man then said, "Shoot another." And he did so. And then the old man said, "Shoot yet again." But the hunter replied, "If I bend the bow so much, I will break it." And then the old man said, "And it is the same with the work of God. If we stretch the brethren beyond measure, they will break. Sometimes it is necessary to meet our human needs." So balance is the secret to a healthy and enduring eremitical life. And every hermit needs to find their own way of relaxing the bow. When we discussed this in one of the issues of Ravensbread, some hermits remarked that it was helpful to them to listen to the daily news on the radio. Interest in the world outside the hermitage can be advantageous if it helps to keep us grounded in the real world and gives us a needed perspective on our own trials, so that we don't think we're the only people in the world who are having a tough time. Normally, the hermit must maintain a good control over how much of the world actually enters their hermitage. But this can be particularly challenging when they're going through the inevitable periods of loneliness, which will crop up. God's presence, contrary to what we might think, does not erase the need for human companionship, for even the most committed of solitaries. Loneliness is never cured because it isn't an illness, but simply a result of the human condition. What is needed is a reason to embrace this personal emptiness that is always part of solitary living. One of our Ravensbread readers, a very wise man, put it this way: "I would hope that I am not the only hermit who is alone, but not because they desire aloneness per se. I am called to it, even though it conflicts with my extrovert personality. I have no desire to chuck the world, but to bring it with me. I see it as part of the calling to be informed about the world, but on a deeper level. I hope to reject the mentality of our environment, but engage its suffering in a way different from before. And while I know the aching void deep inside me, I am not the kind of mystic who can hope to fill it with an experiential sense of God. All I have is the gift of courage to depend on something more, a pure faith deprived of supportive consolations. It is like being lured, as Moses was, to see from afar, but not enter the promised land. Contemplation for me, frankly, is a difficult discipline that must be engaged, promising an inner conflict with my penchant for doing, all I can hope for is a little more balanced peace. Although I did not choose this life, but have somehow been chosen for it, I would not want it any other way. Words of a very brave and wise man.
Yes, indeed. And even though we know, anyone who's tried contemplation knows that it's a difficult discipline, we can still be surprised by the demands of fidelity to it. And we can bump into some grueling struggles, but normally they're not struggles with much drama. Actually, it's the very lack of drama, often enough, that proves to be the hair shirt that means that makes some days feel unbearable. We wind up asking ourselves, why am I here? Does this matter to anyone? Wouldn't I be doing more good somewhere else? Actually, anywhere else?
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly we find ourselves groping for reason to stick it out, anything to keep us afloat. But actually, sometimes we just have to let ourselves sink.
Yes.
After all, there is no reason, no worldly reason anyways, for our life in solitude. We have to accept the facts of our life as they are, and let that itself become our meaning. As one nearby hermit puts it, accepting life on life's terms. We have to choose to consecrate the very everydayness of our lives for the sake of our brothers and sisters.
I would like to share with you one instance of that occurred in my life when I was living in West Virginia. It was necessary for me to get my drinking water from my neighbor down the road. And I would load up my little red wagon with milk bottles and trudge down the road, fill my bottles, and trudge back, often in the hot sun, and was wondering whether this was a good use of my time. And one day, as I was coming back, pulling my wagon of water, I had this vision of a long line of women encircling the earth, all with jars balanced on their heads, or buckets hanging from shoulder yokes. My daily task suddenly became a moment of communion, blessed communion, with millions of women throughout the world who that very day were walking miles sometimes to fetch water for their family needs. Drawing water has been women's work from time immemorial, and now I was among them. Their daily drudgery was now mine as well. We walked together, them and me. Their presence gave meaning to my task, and I hoped my orientation to the holy blessed and eased their steps.
With that, let's spend some time in prayer together.
We light a light in the name of the one who creates life, in the name of the Savior who loves life, in the name of the Spirit who is the fire of life. We have been devoting many of our prayer services to going through the practice of guided imagery. Last week, we found ourselves in a small boat on a lake when a storm came up, and we were dumped into the water and ended up on the shore of a small island. And while we were there, we looked at the things that were washed up, and we found something that we thought was lost, but was really found, intact. One of our listeners informed me that what she found was a small copy of the New Testament with Psalms, which was very precious to her, and it had washed up on the shore intact. But she also found a cross, which she had cherished for a long time, and it was broken beyond repair. We also had the option of trying to decide, what if we had a chance or a choice, what would we choose to have with us on the island? And her choice was food, which indicates her personal practicality. This time, I invite you to relax again, to sit back, or perhaps to lay down on a bed if there is one nearby. Kick off your shoes, remove your glasses, and begin to breathe slowly, deeply. Move your shoulders, wiggle your toes. Feel just relaxation ripple through your body. Imagine yourself going with several friends on a camping trip. While this may or may not be your personal style, remember, everything's possible in imagination. You all come to a small valley, and although it is early, you decide that you will stay there for the rest of the day. You set up your camp, and while that is in process, you notice that there is a path going up the nearest mountain, and you want to climb it. There is time. None of your companions want to go with you, but you're content to be alone, and you start up the path. Imagine as you go higher, the woods through which you are walking begin to thin out, and the terrain becomes rockier. You are confident that you can handle it, and you continue to enjoy the challenge. Only now, you become aware that you have forgotten something important. What did you forget? And what will its loss mean to you? You decide to go on and realize that your path is becoming more narrow, very narrow indeed. It is wide enough for you as long as you stay very close to the mountainside. To the right is a long drop down. Coming around a curve on the path, you discover a sturdy mountain goat. You need to get past him, and you will. How do you get past the mountain goat? Let's visualize this. The rest of the way up the mountain is uneventful. Someone has told you, you remember, that there is an interesting cave at the top of the mountain. You decide it's worth a try looking for it, and you do find it. Go into the cave and look around. What do you see, and how do you feel? As you are walking around the cave, you come upon something unexpected. To your surprise, you find your name is on it. What do you find? How do you feel about what you have found? Remember, feelings never lie. They are very important. Now, retrace your steps and gradually leave the cave and come back to where you really are. Come back to this room and this time. You may want to yawn or stretch, and then begin to think about this imagery or tell it to someone. There are important things to reflect on. For instance, what was it that you forgot? How important was that for you? What did you do? The important thing here is not exactly what you forgot, but how you reacted to the oversight. And then there is the matter of that mountain goat, his territory. How did you get past him? What might this tell you about the way you handle things in life? How do you deal with challenges? And again, about the cave. What was your cave like? How did you feel about being in it? And finally, what did you find that was intended very specifically just for you? What might that mean to you? What does that say about your expectations of life? As always, we invite you, if you wish, to share some of your experiences during the guided imagery. You can contact us through our email at pkfredette, FREDETTE, at frontier.com, or you can reach us through our website, where there is a Contact Us page. Our website is Raven's Bread Ministries, 3 words run together, no caps, ravensbreadministries.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and As you know, we will always be careful and respectful of the responses that we receive.
Our meditative reading tonight is taken from the Hebrew Scriptures in the book of Ecclesiasticus. Happy are you who meditate on wisdom, who reflect in your heart on her ways, and ponder her secrets, who listen for her on life's pathways, and look for her at every turn. She will come to meet you like a mother, and like a young lover, she will welcome you. So listen to the counsel of your own heart. And above all, pray to the Most High, that you may be guided in the way of truth. For it is the Most High who created humankind in the beginning, and gave us the power to choose freely. It is God who wove into our hearts the voice of truth and invites us to act faithfully. Life and death stand before us at each moment, and whichever one we choose will be given. Happy are those whose hearts do not condemn them, and who have not given up hope. God searches the depths of the human spirit and understands our inmost secrets. Those who love wisdom love life, and whoever seeks her from early morning will be blessed. And now, in the silence of our own hearts, or in whatever way we are moved, let's take these final moments to give God thanks for this day and to pray for the life of the world. Thanks be to you, O God, for the night and its light, for stars that emerge out of evening skies and the white moon's radiance. Thanks be to you for the earth's unfolding of color and the bright sheen of creatures from the ocean depths. In the darknesses of the world and in the night of our own souls, let us look with longing for light. Let us look in longing and in hope. The blessings of heaven, the blessings of earth, the blessings of sea and of sky, on those we love this night, and on every human family, the gifts of heaven, the gifts of earth, the gifts of sea and sky. Thank you all for joining with us this evening. God bless you, and good night.